I'm Virginia Edwards. I run the nonprofit that publishes Education Week and edweek.org, the Counts reports, and other kinds of informational data and journalistic content in education. I'm also the editor-in-chief of Education Week. So, as many people have said, we are certainly at an important moment in time, and I would argue the most significant one we've had for more than 25 years, which is the span that I have been working on ed policy issues. Not since the nation at risk have we had this confluence or this alignment of stars ranging from federal policy to federal grant money to the idea of common standards to the notion that the economy and global competitiveness dictates that we confront the shortcomings of our schools. I also think that there's an appreciation for the use of data, the importance of human capital, including ed leadership. We can go on, and I don't need to tell you what you already know. So what we're going to hope to accomplish in this session is to be incredibly concrete, incredibly precise in our remarks, and we're going to try to cover a lot of ground. We have four very special people with us, representing really four very distinct perspectives, though certainly they intertwine. Peter McWalters, the former Commissioner of Education in Rhode Island, who's now working with CCSSO, Chief State School Officers. Bill Ouchi, who is a professor of management in the UCLA School of Business, Graduate School of Business, who has done incredibly important research in the field of education, educational organizations. So he brings an important research perspective. Arlene Ackerman, a well-known superintendent at district level, who's now in Philadelphia, before that in the District of Columbia and in San Francisco, excuse me. And finally, Bob Schwartz, a good friend of K-12, who is now the academic dean at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, who is also going to be able to, so he, actually, I would say he's on the hottest seat of all at this conference, given the way conversation has gone about the importance of training and preparation and the ed school role. Bob also can bring a philanthropic perspective. He headed up the education grant making at the Pew Charitable Trust during an important time in the evolution of education agenda setting, which was the birth of standards-based reform. So let's get started. Peter McWalters, you're going first because there's much of a state perspective here, and I would like you to say what one, and Peter's is going to model behavior for this panel and keep things tight and move things along. What is the one thing that you would say you learned from your long tenure in Rhode Island that you would say is pertinent to this issue of state policy and education leadership?
To actually try to be quick about that, I'm going to go right to Jerry Weiss's frame of reference. 30% prepared, 40% not, and 30% never finish at all. That's the industry I represent. I'm a 35-year educator as a superintendent and 18 years as a chief. Obviously, that defines incrementalism, policy incrementalism. There is right now, finally, a real impatience, at least at the policy demand level, but I do not think for a minute that we have won the hearts and minds of the All Kids agenda. We still represent in practice and demographic separation and sorting and sifting. So this idea of systems change, a la Jerry's vision, which I very much supported, and most of our benchmarked competitive countries have approached it that way, from standards to delivery systems that have indicators, that have measurement, that have incredible support systems. Everybody knows where they're going. We have a tendency here, once we get it, to go from standards to testing to accountability and leave out opportunity to learn, either for the kids or for the adults. So the systems issue is huge. And then quite dramatically, I would suggest when Joel was here or Michelle, good examples of the impatience driven to do it differently, to break through. And I salute that. I think we need to capture those images. But while we do it, it can't be exceptionalism. We have to have systems to learn from them and understand that we're actually trying to build a system of standards and support and achievement and completion, which is, and I'm going to use Jerry as a symbol of that, which by definition is not about individuals. It is about the systems behind them, and it is the kind of thing that is still the hard work of putting together support and accountability systems in a very human industry.
That's terrific. Bill, Ouchi, as a researcher and something you've characterized yourself as something of an interloper into the education space, how would you answer Peter's need for systemic answers to this issue of improving education leadership?
People often say to me that they resist the idea of a management professor advocating autonomy for schools and for principals and decision-making. They say to me, you're trying to turn a principal into a CEO when we think they should be an instructional leader. My reply, in agreeing completely with what my colleague has just said, is that tell me this, in your school district, do the principals decide how many teachers of which kinds they're going to have in their school, or is that decided for them by the central office? Do your principals decide how many non-instructional, non-classroom staff they will have in their school, or is that decided for them by the central office? Do your principals choose their own curriculum and books and materials through which to deliver the state standards, or is that decided for them by the central office? Do your principals get to design the professional development activities for their staff, or are they forced to send teachers to programs selected and designed by the central office? If your principals don't control the schedule, don't control the number of periods per day, if they don't control any of the things I've just mentioned, then what does it mean to think of them as instructional leaders? They don't control any of the variables that are important to instruction. So the context, to me, is everything. If you continue to have top-down, centralized school districts, leadership will continue to be an oxymoron, because principals won't be invited to lead. People who would be good at it won't be attracted to it. And a superintendent who is trying to make all of these decisions for him or herself will be overwhelmed and will not be an effective leader either. Thus, a centralized, top-down district is a district with no leaders. And all of the leadership training in the world, and all of the teacher training in the world, and all of the new curriculum in the world won't make a difference. So we shouldn't be surprised when the research by Eric Hanushak most famously, but also by many others, shows us that none of that works. What does work is decentralization. And perhaps Exhibit A is a person who started the process of decentralization several years ago in the District of Columbia, before then, really, who was instrumental in implementing it in the Seattle School District, who then took it and implemented it in San Francisco. And that's the person that I've been studying for several years, who's sitting next to me, Arlene Ackerman, one of my heroes.
I have no job.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I don't know what to say. I was waiting to hear who that person was. This issue of leadership, I look at it at every level. I've been in this business a long time, and it seems that we spend a lot of time thinking about whether it's either or. What I know in my 40 years is that when I'm looking for leaders, I believe that given the context of what we're dealing with, especially in where I've worked in large urban school systems, we need people who come to these jobs with a sense of urgency. 21-23. All right, what do you think will be going on in 21-23? Sort of take a minute. Or a couple of 10 seconds, okay? But I say 21-23 because it will take the Philadelphia School District until 21-23 to get all of our children to a state of proficiency. All right, I love to hear this silence because that's what happens. But that's my reality. That's the reality of the leaders in our school district at every level. So what must they have, as far as I'm concerned? They have to come with a sense of urgency, because 21-23, 114 years, is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. They have to come being instructionally competent. I don't know why we have the argument that it's either or. You have to know your craft. A doctor has to know his or her craft. I don't apologize for it. Yes, you do have to know the operation side. But I can't imagine what I see in many of my classrooms. We can't fix it at central office. I have to make sure that the people closest to the children, principals, teachers, have the instructional core, understand the instructional core, and can deliver it to children. They have to be intellectually coherent, be able to look at theory, and then make theory a part of practice. I believe they have to be strategic thinkers. They have to collaborate and build partnerships. We are asked in many of our urban school systems to do everything. Our children come to us, many of them, like in Philadelphia, where 78% of the children live below the poverty line. They come with the impacts of poverty. And we can't do this job in isolation. We have to build partnerships with the city, with the state, with social service agencies to get it done. They have to be politically savvy. And then the last most important thing for me is they have to lead without fear.
That's terrific. And we're going to be able to really lap back on all these issues and think about what conditions are necessary and what the system can do to ensure these things. But now, Bob Schwartz, what is the role of Ed Leadership pre-service and your new program that seeks to push that envelope?
Just a quick footnote to Bill's comment about the importance of giving principals control over the key tools and resources they need to do their job. Not only is that generally true, but in an environment in which there's increasing accountability for performance, it's just extremely difficult to convince talented people to sign on to a bargain where you don't have control over the things for which you're going to be held accountable. I'm totally with Arlene on the false dichotomy issue. I mean, it's not top-down or bottom-up. It's trying to figure out what the right mix of leadership and support and direction from the top of a system as large as the ones that Arlene has been running for the last several years, and then how much autonomy to grant to principals, but still to keep people moving in the same direction. Joel, this morning, I thought made an interesting comment about on instructional leadership. It's leadership first. I agree with that. I mean, that is in the sense that I think it's really important to attract people who really know how to mobilize other people, who have some of the traits that Arlene was just talking about in terms of both the political skills and the organizational skills. But at the end of the day, people have to understand the core business that we're in, which is teaching and learning and development. And unless they know enough about the core business, even if they have a broad suite of other kind of managerial skills, it's not going to be enough to actually drive continuous improvement at the classroom level. In terms of the new program that we're launching, that Ginny just kind of referenced, this is a program focused on attracting system-level leaders. There's been a lot of talk here, understandably so, about the importance of school leaders, but we need many more people like Arlene who really know how to lead large systems and bring about large system change. Arlene is actually a product of a terrific program that our university has run for the last 20 years, focused on preparing urban superintendents. We're in a somewhat different environment these days. One of the things that's really changed in this sector is how many more players there are, how competition, as was pointed out this morning, has introduced new providers, both in the teacher arena and the leadership arena. From my perspective, I think this is really healthy. I think that ending the monopoly of education schools on the production of teachers and leaders is a positive thing. We have tried to design a program that kind of capitalizes on a lot of the new energy that the new The new players have provided, both the new capital organizations, human capital organizations like New Leaders and Teach for America and the New Teacher Project, as well as the charter management organizations and others. The program that we are developing and launching next year is a quite different model of leadership preparation for education. It actually bears more resemblance to the way that other professions have thought about leadership development. It's a 3-year program with team taught by a faculty drawn from the business school, the Kennedy School, which is our public policy school, and the education school. Our premise is that, and it's one that the leadership of our university shares, which is that the preparation of the next generation of top-level leaders in education is too important to be left to education schools alone. We need to be able to tap into the kind of professional expertise across the university, and we are hoping that this particular model is one that others will pay attention to. I'll just say one more word, if I can, about the model itself. First year, very much more like a first-year MBA or law school program in the sense of a core curriculum developed and taught by this interfaculty team, focusing on both the kind of core business of teaching and learning, but also a lot of the kind of operational issues that superintendents and other leaders of education nonprofits and state agencies need to know about. Pretty heavy dose of politics and policy as well. Second year, people fanning out depending on their particular career interests and taking courses across the professional schools. Third year, much more medical school style residency, working with a set of partner organizations, one of which I'm happy to say is the Philadelphia Public Schools. We've got 8 or 9 large urban districts, including New York and Chicago and Philadelphia, Denver, Charlotte, Boston, and Atlanta, and 1 or 2 others I'm sure I'm forgetting. But then in addition to those urban districts and a couple of state education agencies, some of the entrepreneurial new entrants in the field that I mentioned earlier, like New Leaders for New Schools and Teach for America. Some of the most important nonprofit organizations in the sector, like the Education Trust, my old organization, Achieve, the Public Education Network, et cetera. And the notion is that we want to, and I think this is an important message for universities, we need to build much more robust partnerships with the organizations into which we are sending people so they can help shape the program and curriculum. But more importantly, as a university, we have committed ourselves to kind of work on a continuing basis with the current leadership of these organizations to help them get better at their work.
Let me track back to Peter McWalters and ask if you could name 3 levers, state policy levers, to bring about improvement in ed leadership, given what we have learned over the past 5-10 years. To a great degree underwritten with Wallace's support, both on the research side and on the practice side. What should state policymakers, state board members focus on?
I actually think we've been through the decentralized system without standards and systems, and I have more failures than successes. So I take issue with decentralization a priori. We are now in an environment where the very first policy statement is be clear about the standards. And to the extent we get to common national standards, however we get there, all the better. Then the issue of articulating that down, but the articulation systems, we're about to go through an exercise that's going to define us for the next 20 years. If the articulation system of that standards movement is content elements by grade level, as opposed to the nature of learning and the developmental issues of habits of mind as that comes down, then you are going to accelerate the on-demand large-scale assessment instrumentation of NITs versus the kinds of things that need to be assessed if you're really going to get all the kids to these standards. So the state policies around standards and the assessment instrumentation and teacher development are the core. Now, having said that, then the 2 or 3 things I think we've learned with Wallace in the last 10 years for me is then you can start talking about don't put a principal in a no-win situation where they can't hire, they are not positioned to allocate resources, they don't have an information system that informs that, and they can't make the kinds of instructional decisions, not wide open, but in the context of a very, very clear set of expectations. And again, I would argue everything I am saying is pretty clearly exampled in some of our benchmark competitive places. And it is a very clear image of loose and tight and roles and relationships up and down the system in terms of what is it that I have a degree of freedom around and what is it that I'm actually controlled in the sense of public policy.
That's true. That's right. And I mean, I think that Peter, your point of articulation and, you know, at the levels, whether it be governmental or some of the preparation, whether pre-service or certainly ongoing professional development, to the extent there's been misalignment is part of the problem, maybe.
Let me be perfectly clear. Right now, if the level of student results is abysmal, that's not an individual teacher's issue. That is a normative, learned behavior on aspirations and on capacity. And when we sort the kids out and then sort the teachers out and sort them out by residence, class, and capacity, we get exactly what we've programmed the system to do. When you break that system back down and you think there's an easy answer to that by going and finding individual excellence and getting them to the right kid, even if you do that, we've already seen examples in the history that as soon as the context changes, that fades away. If you're going to sustain that, you have to know exactly what the elements in the system are, whether it's allocation of resources or human capital systems, and you have to support them systematically so you're constantly able to make the match between the student, the teacher practice, and the information systems that bring best practice to the classroom. Those, to me, are huge systems issues that we are trying to create while we're trying to break through the barriers in the old system. And I, again, will say I look at Michelle and Joel going, go. But it's not an accident of the victory. Every little victory needs to be captured in some sort of a learning environment and built back into a larger system so it's not an accident.
Right. And Arlene, what would you say the articulation is between this vision of state policy and what goes on at the district level?
Well, I think that, you know, again, I hate that we get into this either or. You know, I actually think that the what should, at the district level, should be defined by the district. And I'm talking about standards, I'm talking about assessments, performance targets for schools. I actually agree with Bill that the how should be decided at the school site. And if it's not, and once schools indicate, and we give them support, we fix the systems to make sure that we look at how we allocate resources. We make sure we're doing, making those allocations in a fair and equitable way. We make sure that we provide the necessary supports for children, and so the teachers can teach and focus on the instructional core. But the how, I believe, needs to be left to the people closest to the children. So it's why I believe in decentralization, but I believe that at some level, you have to, the district has to provide the what. The how then gets done at the school level. And if it doesn't happen, if a school doesn't meet the performance targets, if they don't show progress in terms of after we've given them support, then I believe we put in targeted interventions at the district level and you start taking autonomy away. But if you have clearly set the what, then you have to give it to the professionals and say, okay, within the context of your school and your community, how are you going to get this done? And so we're doing that in Philadelphia. I did it in San Francisco, and we moved to the highest performing large urban school system in California. So I believe it can be done, but it's not an either or.
Right.
It is a matter of both, doing both.
I want to concur, but I want to clear something up in either. The issue of it's got to happen at the school level against different district standards. But when you're at scale in a big city like you and I have been in, the idea that you can turn loose the energy at the individual school level without a system of support from day one.
That's true.
And I do see that as a district and state response, not the gotcha one, but why would I expect a school, any individual very low performing school in big systems with whole cultures of low performance, to turn that loose without an upfront energy that is not command and control, but it provides the context and the wherewithal to even look at the information and change practice. That's what I mean in terms of a system of support, which does have thought through, has well thought through, where is the decision-making authority on what kinds of topics over what kinds of time.
Bill, let me, do you have your book up here? I thought you would have a visual aid so I could shill for you.
Mine is down there.
Don't have one.
Okay, well, we'll get it up here to show. The Secret of TSL is Bill Ouchi's new book, and it is another book on this notion of decentralization and other aspects. But Bill, your research has shown, Vanna will show you the book. Bill, your research has shown very specific ways to exercise this decentralization, what it is you mean when you say a principal gets to make decisions over what. Okay. What are some of those very specific things?
Let me start by saying that the story of decentralizing a major district is a nuanced story. I'm going to necessarily oversimplify in my remarks this morning, but it's a story of failure and success, of 2 steps forward and 1 back. It can be a fragile solution. It is by far, in my mind, the most difficult form of reform there is. It's much easier to retrain all of your teachers than it is to decentralize your district in a sensible way. In fact, it's so difficult to implement that there's no reason in the world to attempt it except that it's the only thing that works. Now, many districts will tell you they have tried decentralization and have found that it did not work. They've tried site-based management, or they had a 1988 law passed in the state of Illinois. My research team has conducted 2 studies totaling almost 700 schools from coast to coast. We have studied every single major district in this country that is decentralizing or that has decentralized. Our study is unique, I think, in 2 respects. First of all, we actually measured the amount of local authority that the principals have. I can't think of another study that has done that. Second of all, we related the degree of school empowerment to the gains in achievement by students. I also can't think of a study that has done that. We found the effects are huge. These are not the tiny, minuscule, and often invisible results that you find in most large-scale studies of student performance. For instance, in 2001, my team interviewed 66 principals in New York City. We sat down with each one and went through their budget line by line and said, let's determine whether this item is controlled by you, Mrs. Principal, or by the central office or someone else. And we found that on the average, New York City principals in the year 2001 controlled 6.1% of the money spent in their schools. In Los Angeles, it was 6.7%. In Chicago, it was at the time 19.3%. Now it's 13%. We went back in 2006 after Klein and Eric Nadelstern had implemented the autonomy zone for a total of 48 schools and followed those 48 schools, and found that on the average, the principals in those schools now controlled 85% of the money spent in their schools. We found that in St. Paul, Minnesota, where they had decentralized, principals controlled 87% of the money spent in their schools. All of this following on the heels of an invention that started in 1975 in Edmonton, Canada, under the leadership of Superintendent Mike Strembitsky, where today principals control 97% of the money spent in their schools. Now, in the second study, which is what my new book is about, we visited 442 schools to find out what do principals do differently when you give them the authority over their budget, curriculum, schedule, and staffing. And the bottom line is that we did a gigantic multivariate analysis, both 2SLS and OLS, for those who care about such things. And we put in all of the normal suspects that might affect student performance, including number of years of teacher experience, including do you have a new math curriculum, do you have a new reading curriculum, including class size, including days of professional development, including number of hours per week of preparation time for teachers. None of those had any effect on student performance improvement between 2003 and 2005, as many other studies have found. What had a huge impact was total student load, which is not correlated with class size. Total student load refers to the number of young human beings that a teacher must get to know, and thus to the degree of personalization of the relationship that is possible. We found that in the elite private schools of America, if your child is lucky enough to enroll there, total student load averages 60 to 65 students per teacher. By contract, in Boston, it's a maximum of 5 classes of 34 each, for a TSL of 28 students each, for a TSL of 140 maximum in Boston, 170 in New York City, 225 in Los Angeles. In Eric Nadelstern's autonomous schools, the average total student load is 85. And some of them are in the 60s, and they have no additional money. How do they get there? 2 ways. First of all, as Linda Darling-Hammond has reported, and as the Chicago Consortium in a paper by Valerie Lee and others has reported, on the average in this country, the percentage of employees of a school district who are not in the classroom is 43%. We found that at many schools traditionally run in centralized districts, the average administrative ratio is 44% of the employees in the school are not in the classroom. In the autonomous schools, it's 4%. So those principals are hiring people not to do lunchroom duty, not to do playground duty, not to run the copying machine, not to be additional registrars, assistant registrars, attendance clerks, assistant attendance clerks, program managers, and on and on and on. They're hiring more classroom personnel, both credentialed teachers and aides who are instructed at the school in how to help to teach. It means that the elementary classrooms, they stagger the times when each grade level teaches ELA, so that as many as 3 adults attend each classroom during reading instruction, and the 24 students there are divided among 4 teachers. So reading is taught in groups of 6 students per teacher with no additional money. The second thing they do is they use their freedom over curriculum and schedule, for example, to undertake blocking and coring, so that in middle or senior high, the history teachers and the English teachers may agree to form a single humanities course, so that each teacher, let's say you're an English teacher, you will now teach a 2-period-long humanities course to, let's say, 25 students, and during which you will teach them both the required English and the required history, but in an integrated fashion.
Bill.
Then you will have another, I'm almost done. Then you will have another humanities course of 2 periods. So now you will